Hi, I'm Stephanie Torba, and today I'm going to teach you how to make kombucha. You can only use green tea or black tea for kombucha. No other type of tea will work. And for each recipe, I use 7 bags. I make 3 recipes at a time, and so I'm ripping open all of these packages, but for me, it's more cost effective to do it this way when I buy it by the case. You can also buy it loose leaf. I also switched over to decaf green tea because I like to drink my kombucha at night, and if I'm drinking caffeine at night, I will never sleep. As far as the water goes for kombucha, you want to use spring water, purified water, really clean water. Distilled water doesn't really have any life in it, so that's not really a water that you'd want to use. The kombucha thrives more on a more of a spring water, purified water. You want to bring the water to a complete boil because not only are you making tea, but you want to make sure there's nothing in the water that could contaminate your kombucha culture. For my kombucha recipe, I use 1 cup per 3 quarts of water. So 1 cup per recipe. You don't want to use any other type of sugar than white sugar for your kombucha because it will definitely make it taste funny. All right, so I just poured the sugar in and just stir it up a bit. And then I want to bring it back to a boil. I boiled it for about 5 minutes now, and it's time to put in the tea bags. I left my tea bags steeping all day once. I left the house and I completely forgot to finish my kombucha. I came home, I finished the kombucha, and it tasted really bad. It was bitter, just kind of yucky. So make sure that you set a timer when you're steeping your tea. And if it has a sort of like scummy look across the top, you might want to start over because, yeah, it's pretty bad if you leave it too long. Now I'm taking out the tea bags. The tea is done steeping. Some of them fell into the water, but you want to make sure that you keep your SCOBY clean. You don't want it contaminated with anything. When I make kombucha, I use stainless steel pot, I use stainless steel silverware, I use glass to make my kombucha in, and I usually use glass to store my SCOBY to keep everything as clean as you possibly can because that SCOBY can get contaminated. But they are pretty resilient. I did have fruit flies get through the cover that I had on my kombucha, and they infested part of my SCOBY, and I cut that part off, and it was fine. I just threw out the rest. Once your tea has cooled off enough to be poured into your container, then go ahead and do that. You can ferment kombucha anywhere from 64 to 90 degrees. So if the tea is still pretty warm, that's okay. Sometimes when I'm boiling the water, I will lose some water. And when I pour it in, it's less than what it should be. So then I'll just top it off with a little extra water. So we'll see how it goes this time. Perfect. This is my kombucha culture. I would say it's about 4 years old. I've given a lot of it away. The first time I made kombucha, I noticed that my culture was brown, and I thought it had gone bad, but it hadn't, and I threw it out and started over. When your kombucha culture goes bad, it turns black. This is a really healthy culture. It doesn't look very healthy, but it is. The white part on the left is the part that would be facing up in the container. And I keep, in between my batches, I keep my culture sitting in kombucha and in a room temperature sort of cool cupboard. It's not supposed to be exposed to light, even during brewing. It's best to be kept in a dark place that isn't overly warm or overly cold. If you put it in the refrigerator, you will kill it. If you put it somewhere that's too warm, you will eventually kill it as well. So it's good to have it at room temperature and out of the sun. Every time you make kombucha, it will create a new SCOBY that will be lighter in color, newer, fresher than the one below it. You can always take off these newer ones and just save those, or you can use the older SCOBY. I generally just keep using them, and then as it gets really, they get darker as they get older, and if it doesn't feel as firm, I generally just take it and plant it in my garden under one of my plants. It actually helps them grow much better. Plants love scobies, but I like to keep the newer SCOBY. I don't generally store scobies. I try to either give them away, but people do save them, the extra, just in case, and also to share with other people. One SCOBY, if you were to use just the same SCOBY over and over and not use the new ones being created, you could probably make up to 10 batches with that, and they would still taste really good. To tell if your SCOBY is healthy or not is very easy. The color can get very dark brown. That's when it's getting older. That doesn't mean you still can't use it to make kombucha, like I said, but if it turns black or you see fuzzy mold on it, then toss the whole thing. I wouldn't even give it to my plants. Or give it to your dog. I've heard people dry them out and give them to their dogs as dog treats. I've not tried that yet. I have too many plants that need it first, and I'm not really wanting to give my dogs extra food because they get fat really quick. I actually do put kombucha in my dog's water sometimes when I think about it, because it really does help with digestion, just a little bit, a couple teaspoons, and they don't seem to notice, but that can be a really great thing for your pet. So when you transfer your tea into your first ferment container, that's when you put the SCOBY on top. If you're not totally sure which side, don't freak out. It will still work. It may not work as quickly, but it'll still work. And then as the kombucha is being made, the SCOBY actually creates another SCOBY. So the mother SCOBY creates like a little child SCOBY, and that SCOBY will take the shape of whatever container that you put it in, and that would be the newer SCOBY. And later you can actually separate these by your hands, or you could take a scissors. I usually just pull them apart. The more SCOBY that you have in your container, the faster your kombucha will ferment. The only downside of that is the larger the SCOBY gets, the more space it takes up. And so in the end, you'll have less kombucha. So I don't know. Usually I only put a couple, 2 in there for my 9-quart container. Any more than that takes up too much space because my SCOBY gets large because of the container that I use. So the next step after you get your sweet tea in there is you want to put your SCOBY into the sweet tea. And what I have here, you can see that one side of my SCOBY is lighter colored and one side is darker. You want to put the lighter side on top. And then I've got another one in here, and put the lighter side up. And then if you have space, you can pour the kombucha that your SCOBY was stored in. So once the SCOBY is in the container, that's when you want to put the cheesecloth on top, or a very, maybe even a piece of linen, something that's a fabric that's breathable, but doesn't let the fruit flies in. So the next step is to put a few layers of cheesecloth over. So the point is letting the air get through, but not the bugs. And in the summer, I have to sometimes put 4 layers because those little guys will dig through the holes and find a way in anyhow. And here's a rubber band on top. If you want my recipe for kombucha, I did post it on my website, stephanietorba.com. So you can just go there and print it out if you would like to have it. At this point, I'm ready to put my kombucha in a well-ventilated, dark area. You don't want it sitting in the sun, especially if it's in a glass container. I like to I have radiated heat in my house, so I have a tray that I put on top of a specific radiator where it's out of the way, where no one can disturb it. And I just set it on that tray and let it ferment there. With the heater coming on and off, it takes about 6 days, depending on where you put your kombucha, how warm it is. You can ferment kombucha anywhere from 64 to 90 degrees, but if you have it at 64 degrees, it will take longer to ferment than if you have it at 90 degrees. There's also I guess you'd call it a tool called a brew belt that you can buy, And what it does is it's like the strip that wraps around your container, and then you plug it in and it will keep your kombucha at a stable temperature. If you don't have an area in your house where you know you can set the kombucha and it'll be safe and also be getting warm, that may be something you want to consider, because then you can put it anywhere. Another nice thing about the brew belt is that you will always know when your kombucha is going to be finished, because it's very consistent. So I've never used one. I've never needed to use one because I do have radiators, but a lot of people use them and they swear by them. When you want to make sure your kombucha is finished, just pour off a couple ounces, or even I just take a little spoon and I sip it. If it's a little tangy, but then I also taste that it's a bit too sweet, I'll leave it for another day or two, usually a couple more days. In this container, this is a 9-quart batch. Depending on the temperature, I can have kombucha in, right now it's taking about 5 or 6 days for it to be almost finished, or even by the 6th day it's finished. Maybe I leave it another day. Sometimes it can take 2 weeks. If you have your kombucha sitting at 64 degrees and you have a small SCOBY, it could take up to 2 weeks to make a batch, or 3 batches like this. It really depends. So it doesn't hurt to just keep testing it as the days go by. The kombucha won't change that quickly from day to day. So it's not like one day you're not really sure, it tastes a little bit sweet, and then if you leave it another day or two, it's going to suddenly become vinegar. It doesn't happen that quickly, especially if you're making a larger batch. If you make a single batch, which is 3 quarts on the recipe that I put on my website, one day may make a difference, especially if you have it sitting at 90 degrees. So it really depends on how big your SCOBY is, how hot the water is, how big of a batch you're making. So just keep on your kombucha when you're first making it. And then as time goes on, you can get more relaxed. You'll figure out what size works best for you. My advice as far as what size to start with would be, don't start with 3 quarts. Start with a bigger batch. Because if you really like kombucha, I can drink 3 quarts of kombucha in 2 days easy. And then you have to start the whole process again, and it just becomes a lot more work. But if you have a larger container, it's so much less work. This my other one that broke was really big, and I was finding that I didn't have enough room in my refrigerator. It was so many bottles to store, and then the container, because it was glass, it just wasn't thick enough and it ended up breaking. What I do, as soon as I pour this off and do the second ferment in the bottles, then I start another batch, or I wait a couple days and start another batch and get that going. So with this size, you will, if you're like me, you will be sort of constantly brewing kombucha, and your SCOBY will get bigger and you'll be trying to give it away to people. But you can always just throw it away as well if you don't have a garden or dogs, and nobody wants to make kombucha. They just want to come over and take yours. Or tell you to bring it when you go to a dinner party. Yeah, a lot of people don't want to do this because it is a little bit extra work. But I enjoy it, and I think my kombucha is actually better than the kombucha I buy in the stores. If you enjoyed this video and you would like to learn how to do the second ferment with kombucha, press the subscription button below, and if you click on the little bell next to the subscription button, you'll know as soon as I upload that video. With kombucha, I like to drink it flat, like this. When it's finished, it's ready. I'll drink it warm, I put it in the fridge, I drink it cold, I add ice to it. I love it, all different ways. But then also with this batch, I will make, usually I make 2/3 of it with carbonation, because I really like drinking kombucha with the bubbles. I also uploaded my recipe for kombucha on my website, stephanietorba.com. So if you want to go there and download that, it's available to you. And I hope to see you on the next video. Have a great week.